What if Rey joined Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker? In this video, I'll be covering my theory on what would have happened had Rey given in to her grandfather's temptations. Now, this is actually a much bigger possibility than many people may realize, as it is explained in the novelization for The Rise of Skywalker that Rey nearly did fall for Darth Sidious's deception, and that Ben Solo's arrival on Exegol is what saved her. So let's now explore what would have happened had Ben not made it in time, and Rey had struck Palpatine down, allowing his essence to transfer into her. Now, we don't really know how much control he would have over her had this happened, but it does seem like Rey would still be aware of her true self, but that Palpatine would have a strong influence over her. So the way I view it is sort of how Vader viewed himself and Anakin as different people, when in reality Anakin still lived inside Vader somewhere. So this is just my understanding, but the way I see things going down is that Palpatine would have a considerable amount of control, so Rey would definitely assume the throne of the Sith and reign over the galaxy, but the light of her true self would still live somewhere inside of her, and with the proper triggers, she could possibly be brought back out. But now let's get into this scenario. Ben would sense this transition as it happened and be devastated. He was on his way to save her, and now after all this time, after he'd finally found himself, Rey finally committed to the dark side? She couldn't join him no matter how many times he pleaded, but that monster had convinced her in one attempt. Maybe it wasn't up to her. Maybe she was possessed, or maybe she was forced in some other way. Something inside Ben would tell him that it wasn't what she wanted. Maybe it was Rey herself trying to reach out to him for help. It made no sense. She would never in a million years turn to the dark side unless it was to save the ones she cares about. That was it. She had been forced to turn. He knew that feeling all too well. But heading to Exegol now would be suicide. He stood no chance against Palpatine alone, and there was no telling how Rey would react anymore. He assumed he could help her, that she would join him, but something was telling him now was not the time. It wasn't fear, as he had nothing to lose, but some other instinct deep down was pushing him away. It was as if some familiar presence was trying to speak to him, but couldn't do it quite yet. He trusted it. He immediately turned his ship around to get as far away from Exegol as he could. But where could he go? His family was gone. He couldn't simply show up to the Resistance and think they were going to accept him. Nobody would be able to understand what was going on, nor would he ever be given the chance to share his side of the story. Lando might be able to help, but then again, he probably hated him by now too. And Chewie would never forgive him for what he'd done on Starkiller Base, as much as Ben longed to rekindle that relationship. In all his years away from his family, Chewbacca was the one he never blamed for any of it. The one he would never think to hurt under any circumstance. The Final Order was sure to reign over the galaxy. Who could help him? Just as things were beginning to look up, just as he had finally found the light at the end of the tunnel, the pathway back to happiness, he was all alone once again. He would never return to the Order. He had only been freed of Kylo Ren for a few hours, but he despised him nonetheless. He truly felt like Ben Solo and Kylo Ren were different people. His father was right. Kylo Ren was dead, and he was never coming back. As he continued to fly aimlessly, he thought back to the good old times when he got to fly with his father. He always wanted to be a pilot. As much as he had tried to convince himself that his parents had caused his downfall, as much as he'd blamed them for everything, he always loved them, and he couldn't help to wonder what his life could have been like had they never sent him away. His thoughts drifted back to Chewbacca. He missed that old Wookiee. Why hadn't he freed him and left the First Order when he could, when he had him right in front of his face in the interrogation room? Maybe he'd remember. No, I can't go back, he thought to himself. But then, just as he'd heard her on the ruins of the Death Star, his mother's voice called out to him. Don't be afraid, Ben. Let the past die. You know what you have to do. That was the same presence that drove him away from Exegol. He didn't know how or why it was going to work, but suddenly Ben knew what to do. He turned the ship around and headed back to the Resistance base. The Force guided him to their new location, and by the time he arrived they had all settled in, safely hidden away from Rey and the Emperor for now. He waited till nightfall and then went to find his old friend. He didn't have to look for very long. Chewie was still outside quietly working on the Falcon. Ben couldn't just walk up to him. He'd make a scene, and before he knew it the whole Alliance would know he was there. He made some noises from deep in the forest to draw the Wookiee's attention. After some pretty loud persuasion, Chewie went to investigate. He followed the noises deep into the forest, away from the base, until he finally found what was causing the ruckus. Ben stood in a small clearing and tried to offer a friendly smile, but as he expected, it was no use. The Wookiee let out a vicious roar and pulled his blaster. Ben dove out of the way, dodging the fire and freezing any bolts that came in too hot. Finally, he pulled the gun away and shouted, begging Chewie to calm down and give him a chance. The Wookiee paused and stepped back in confusion. Ben realized that he had probably been a little too loud, but then again, the blaster fire had probably already alerted everyone of their position. Chewie, can you please just listen? Chewbacca settled down, but he certainly didn't trust the cold-blooded monster in front of him. I know you must hate him. Me. I know you must hate me. Who could blame you? I killed your best friend. Not a day's gone by that I haven't been haunted by that moment. His eyes began to tear up as he continued. I never wanted to leave you guys, Chewie. I was scared. I didn't know what to do or who to trust. One bad move led to another, and I'm sorry, Chewie. I'm not here to make excuses, but I needed you to know that before I told you this, because it's gonna sound crazy. I talked to Leia today, and Han, and a whole bunch of other stuff happened, and now I'm here talking to you. Chewie, Kylo Ren is dead. I'm back. And if you don't accept me and you run me off planet right now, I get it. I'm expecting that. But the truth is, I need your help. You're the only way I can get any of these people to accept me, and that's the only way we're ever going to defeat the Final Order, and the only way any of us will ever see Rey again. Chewie lifted Ben into the air in a whirl of rage. Ben did not resist. The truth was, Chewbacca had always held out hope for Ben. He missed him dearly, but he couldn't let him know that. This man had taken his best friend, and Luke and Leia were now dead at his expense as well. Chewie agreed to help Ben save Rey, but refused to forgive him for his sins. Finn watched from the bushes as Kylo Ren manipulated Chewie, and as he saw Ren's deception get the best of the Wookiee, he shot multiple rounds of blaster fire at Ben Solo. But the bolts were stopped in mid-air. Finn would be filled with fear and disappointment in himself for even thinking Kylo wouldn't have sensed him coming. He swung his shoulders around, expecting not to be able to move, but to his surprise, he was completely free. Kylo was not trying to hurt him. Finn had little experience in the Force, but in this moment, he would sense something different about Kylo. Chewbacca would step in front of Ben and proceed to approach Finn, and begin to explain to him and any of the rebel troops who could understand him what was going on. But Ben interrupted him. I can explain. I know nothing I say here is going to change what any of you think of me, but I'm here as a friend. You lost your best fighter today, but she's not gone. If you allow me to help you now, we can bring her back, and maybe, just maybe, I can begin to make things right. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, I simply want your help. Neither of us can do this alone. R2 rolled toward Ben until he was just an arm's length away. Ben smiled slightly and winked at his old friend. Poe told Finn he was going to give the order to fire, but Finn pushed Poe's blaster down and took a step forward. He glanced at Maz Kanata, who gave him a reassuring nod. Finn spoke up. If this war has taught me one thing, it's that life is all about choices. I see your eyes, I know that look. Come and show us what you've got.